words of my mouth and meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and Redeemer. Amen. You can stand the whole time. Sit down. It would seem that these two readings are very, very different. The gospel is very theological. I am the true vine, my Father is the vine grower. Abide in me, bearing fruit of the Spirit. If you abide in me and keep my word, and this very pastoral and very theological. And the reading from Acts seems to be like an end-of-day report from a legislature. Certain individuals came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you were circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. So these folks showed up. Paul and Barnabas debated with them and then went off to Jerusalem to talk the conversion of the Gentiles. And then it gets, okay, they finally make it to Jerusalem. They're welcomed by the church, the apostles and the elders, and they reported all that had happened, the conversions and all the things they'd been doing on their trip. But some believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees stood up and said, again, same message, it's necessary for them to be circumcised and ordered to keep the law of Moses. Then the apostles and the elders met together to consider this matter. Where's the teaching in that? Where's the theology in that? Where's the pastoral nature of things? I mean, it's describing what happened, but if we're just assuming this is where it all ends and we don't read the following verses, what does this mean? What are we to take from this? That, I guess where's it's a little, particularly in comparison with this, I am the true vine and abide in me, it seems very practical. I mean, it reads like it's Robert's Rules of Orders. We have this disagreement, you debated it, go talk to the people in charge, and they're going to meet together as well and consider the matter. What are we being told by this reading taken by itself? Not in the context of the broader chapter of Acts, but in context with this vine and fruit and abiding passage. Because that's what we should be taking together. And sort of measuring it and seeing through the lens. And I think it's interesting because there is some unspoken abiding going on in this passage from Acts. There's this dissension. There's the group that says, listen, anybody who's going to follow Jesus, they're great, join us, but you basically have to convert to Judaism and follow the law of Moses to do so. One, it teaches us that this vision of their own understanding was that they were still Jewish. This was not something new yet. And so to be part of it, you then had to become Jewish. They were welcoming, they were open, but they were saying, you got to do this. Paul and Barnabas are saying, well, you don't, because all these people are believing in Jesus. And culturally, they're not part of this. They're not Jewish from the cultural side. And instead of stoning each other, instead of, being like St. Nicholas and punching each other in the nose or running them out of the church where they were meeting or the place they were meeting or running faster than the other to Jerusalem to be like, listen, we need to decide this, and not letting both sides kind of give their case. Instead of, saying, well, we disagree, so I'm going to have nothing to do with you. They both go before those who have the authority to make the decision, the apostles and the elders in the church in Jerusalem, the first churches. And they say, here's what's going on, and they lay out their case. And this whole time, they're with each other. I'm sure this did not take just mere minutes. In fact, they probably traveled together to Jerusalem for this to happen. So they're sharing meals, they're sharing tents, they're walking down the road together. They're not separating. They're not setting this up as a I win, you lose. This is about finding what is right and what is true. So they are abiding in each other, exactly as Jesus talks about here. And beyond that, what they want to do is not say, well, they're wrong, get them out of here. They're looking for what's right and what's true. So they are looking for branches that are bearing fruit and those that aren't. And if they're not bearing fruit, they're pruned away. And that's, as pastoral as it sounds and as universal as it may sound, this gospel, the very first sentence, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. By definition, there's an exclusivity here. If it's a branch that bears no fruit, it's removed. And as we get to the end, it's even more so. Not only is it removed, but those branches, they wither. They're gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. Are we the ones to decide which vines are bearing no fruit? In a way, yeah, I think we are. But we need to decide what's bearing no fruit in us. So it's not about removing, Fred's branches. We're saying Fred's branch is bearing no fruit. It's about saying what in me is bearing no fruit. What are the branches? Just the phrase that Jesus was, he removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Not the branches around me, not the branches over there, the branches in me that bear no fruit. So what am I doing that is bearing no fruit? That needs to be removed. That needs to be gathered up and burned in the fire. But we each need to ask that question. And then collectively, as a church, we can ask that question and say, what are the branches in St. Paul's that are not bearing fruit? Is there a point to do this if it's not bearing fruit? If not, let's remove it. Because I know we're probably coming up to the time where people are going to start putting in gardens and things like that. And maybe even just growing tomatoes on your back porch or your deck. And if you've ever grown tomatoes or anything that bears fruit from a vine, what's something you need to check for every day and remove?
Mites.
Well, no, not that you spray, yeah, but part of the plant. Suckers. There's those little branches that start to grow right at the base, and you pluck them off and remove them. But why do you do that? Because Grandma told you to? Pretty much?
Yeah.
Grandma never told you why. You pluck them off because it's a vine that's going to grow that never bears fruit. And it takes away the nutrients from the vine that does bear fruit. It's about scarce resources, whether that is time or money or energy or what have you, space. You have to remove the vines that bear no fruit so the ones that do bear fruit can bear the best and most fruit that they possibly can. It's about maximizing potential. So if we had, a small space and there were 6 groups that needed to use it at once, and 2 of them were doing great things and it was just fantastic, and one was just like one person doing something that wasn't helpful at all. Well, you say, you know what, we're going to let the groups that are using, that are doing, that are growing, we see the fruit they're bearing. Sometimes the fruit that's born is not visible, it's not measurable, it's not all numbers and money and things like that. There's good things that can happen in isolation and without those things you can put on a spreadsheet. But that's what we need to discern. What in us bears no fruit? And then we need to make the decision to remove those branches. And that's real hard because it can sometimes hurt. Because sometimes those are things that used to bear fruit. Imagine if you had your tomato plant growing year after year. Sometimes those branches are going to wither and they're not going to bear fruit anymore, and now they need to be removed. That's the hard part. It's easy when you see it and say, well, that is just doing nothing, remove it. But if it's one that served you and fed you and produced, but now is withered and taking nutrients from the other parts. So that's what we need to do. And so that's why these two things, although they seem to be unrelated, they really do call us to the same thing. They call us to that abiding, to that not just saying, well, we have difference of opinions, I'm going to cut you out, to saying we need to sit down together as a group. The apostles and the elders met together to consider the matter and decide what is true and what is right and what bears fruit and what does not bear fruit. We remove it. To God be all the glory, now and forever. Amen.
If this message raised questions or stirred something in you, I'd love for you to stay connected. So like, share, and subscribe. Now go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and I'll see you next time.